So as this unit comes to an end, I want to take you on a journey that revisits our starting point. This idea that we've been working on a unit called Ideas in the Modern World. Certainly we've been studying the Russian Revolution, but this unit has really been playing with the way in which ideas shape human actions, shape the human world. If you think about it, we've been on a bit of a journey. We've been on a journey from looking at Tsarism and Tsarist autocracy with its pyramid of power, its social pyramid, hierarchical structures of society that mirrored feudalism. And we've gone on to a journey where we've seen a new society being created by the Bolsheviks along Marxist, Leninist principles of equality. And to achieve that, they created this sort of authoritarian dictatorship in which no other idea was tolerated. So there's so many stories of ideas that we've played with. If you think about it a little bit more, we started with the idea of revolution, pushing Tsar Nicholas II off the throne, removing the Romanov dynasty after a long period of time, 300 or so years on the throne. And that idea was linked to this international form of communism, this sense of international Marxist thought. I'll just adjust that slightly for us. So when we've been looking at these ideas, we've played with a lot of other concepts as well. We've played with, for example, Tsarism, autocracy and feudalism. We've seen present in here images of anti-Semitism, which had existed in Tsarist Russia and continued well after it. We connected the idea of anti-Semitism to the fact that both Trotsky and Marx had Jewish background, but neither of them were practicing Jews. So there's that anti-Semitism somehow still tainting their society and still being criticised on racial grounds by their ideological enemies. We've looked at the ideas of Marxism, Bolshevism and Leninism and communism and have been throwing those words around. We've even touched on the idea of women's equality and gender equality and feminism. And then we finally left it at this creation of a police state under the Cheka, authoritarianism, and even totalitarianism under Joseph Stalin. I'd like to leave you with these thoughts. When we look at big events in the world, as historians, can we make conclusions around why changes actually occur? Why did this revolution occur in your mind? What were its causes? And as you start playing with those ideas, I'd like you to ask yourself, is it truly possible to know what the causes are? Can we ever put major events down to just one thing? What do you think about these kind of ideas? What's the role of ideas in shaping world events? How important was the failings of Tsarism, the failings of autocracy, the fact that feudalism had lasted well past what it had in Western Europe, in Russia? Concepts like anti-Semitism, how important are these in leading to revolution? Perhaps the anti-Jewish nature of a lot of Western societies led people like Marx to find solace in his intellectual pursuits, and maybe that shaped what happened afterwards. Marxism, is it the force that changed Russia? Is that what caused these Russian revolutions? Because in a sense it was liberalism, it was the sense of having liberal democratic ideas that occurred first. Even the Bolsheviks didn't expect Marxism to take off in Russia in 1917. What about Bolshevism or communism or Leninism themselves? What is the power of those ideas? Leads us also to think of power in our society, the way in which ideas are unleashed, such as feminism, and the way perhaps we have a tendency towards this sense of authoritarianism, listening to the strong voice, that some people want to take power and hold it for themselves and take total control of society perhaps. How important are ideas in shaping the world we live in? An alternative view is maybe it's people that make the difference. That it was Tsar Nicholas II who brought about the revolution, for mishandling the events that took place in his lifetime. Perhaps it's the failings of the Romanov dynasty to embrace change earlier. Maybe it's the writings of Marx and Engels. It's the people, their experiences that shape the world. Perhaps it's the provisional government taking power and not having those elections early enough without resolving World War I, without making sure there was bread and land reform. Perhaps, therefore, it's people like Kerensky that led to the revolution of 1917, the October Revolution. Or maybe it comes down to those great men. There's a theory called the great man theory of history. Is it Lenin and Trotsky that set the ball rolling? Do we put we put them at the centre of it? Do we focus on them as the main reason the revolution took place? These are alternative views. Some would argue that people and ideas are swept up in events, that events such as winters, environmental conditions, don't care who you are or what ideas you have, that without the bitter winter, without the environmental conditions, the revolution would never happen. If it wasn't for that event of Bloody Sunday where some unknown soldier fired on the crowd and many, many people were killed, there would have been no anniversary event in 1917, which led to the February Revolution event, which led to the October Revolution event. Or perhaps it was this sense of European imperialism in Asia that led the Japanese to want to modernize their fleet, which led to the Japanese defeating the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War in humiliation. Maybe that was the event that led ultimately to October 1917. What about World War I? If the Russian armies were winning World War I, a counterfactual this is called, if they were winning, would the Russian Revolution have ever happened? So perhaps it's not ideas, perhaps it's not people, but events. Or perhaps it is ideas and the events don't matter without ideas happening behind it. Or if it wasn't those people at that time in those events with those ideas, without that special combination, nothing would have happened. And that leads us to this last way of seeing. When we're looking at the ideas of the modern world, perhaps ideas are in some sort of complex interplay of events and people. And it's that interplay between ideas, events, and people, between the people, the context, and what they're thinking and what ideas are developing in our intellectual growth, that leads to major changes in society. I'm recording this in one of the early weeks of the COVID-19 outbreak, pandemic affecting Australia. I think that would be an example of an event well beyond the control of people, an event that has no intellectual foundation, that is going to really transform our world. But would it transform our world if it weren't for ideas like environmentalism and our uses of technology already being developed? I suspect that the people of the world play an important part in the way that they social distance, in the sense of how we move between countries. So what role does an event have without ideas and people? What influence does an event have without ideas and people? This complex interplay is something for you to get your head around. What was the role of ideas in the Russian Revolution? And what is the role that ideas play in our modern world? I'll leave you with that thought.